the key insight for the final design came late one night when we were standing in the garage, frantically trying to finish for the Faire. And Sam, my older son, and I both had the exact same realization at the exact same time. And we just turned to each other. We didn't have to say anything. We just had this huge smile on our faces. And my day job is running the research group at Pixar. So I invent things for a living. That's what I get paid to do. But that moment of discovery was one of the most satisfying I've ever had in my career. It was just, and largely because it was a meaningful discovery that we had together, and we were participating as collaborators. It wasn't me teaching. It was, we were just project collaborators.
There's no question in my mind that what we're doing applies to school, applies to learning, applies to education. I see Maker Faire as a learning event. We're finding all these resources in the community and making them, for a weekend, very visible and accessible to everybody. But the weekend after Maker Faire, they're kind of gone back into the woodwork. And when we talk about mentors, how do we find those mentors in our community? How do we find someone to teach welding? How do we find someone to teach, fire safety, for instance? So that's kind of been a really interesting question. And also, the other thing is we get kids to Maker Faire and their parents who are equally inspired to begin making things. What happens when they go home? And they, if the right situation, they both start to figure that out. And that's a nice thing to happen. But they go to school. A kid goes to school and says, "I'd like to make stuff here." The school doesn't really include that mode of learning. What happens there? And also out in the community, neighborhoods. Some neighbor may have a great garage that you can, hey, that's open. I could go in and talk to that person and learn from them. What if that's not the case? So we've been really thinking a lot. In some ways, Young Makers is one of those kind of initiatives we felt we could pilot ourselves to just kind of self-organize this at a community level. Because Maker Faire itself really is a community event, and the question isn't like what so much happens there, but what happens as a result of Maker Faire? What are you able to do in the community that you couldn't do before? A great emphasis on standardized testing, which I kind of think is antithetical to making. The kind of mode of learning that is predominant in schools is really not authentic learning. It's really memorization and rote drill. And so, I would rather see that be turned over.
I'm studying to be an industrial arts teacher down in San Jose, and the shops I've been in, they are what you're talking about. It's just you can't see it because they're so small, right? And there's no value in them.
Right.
So, but they are free. Like kids can make up their own projects and stuff like that. But they're far and few between.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a decline in them.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I find so interesting is to really allow kids to connect to their interests through making, rather than having everybody doing the same thing at the same time, the same way. If you're interested in music, you can make musical instruments, you can make synthesizers, you can learn electronics, you can do a lot. How do we kind of set those pathways and progressions up for kids? And the other side that's interesting too that you bring up, shop, it's not perhaps the only reason, but it's certainly a reason. Parents stopped demanding it. When they said they were going to close the shop class, nobody showed up and threw a fit about it. They said, fine, my kid's not going to do manual labor. They're not a tradesperson. We're going to get them into the AP classes and accelerate. So it's often been that kind of thing. It's not until they get to the design school where they have to go back to learn these machines or other, figure out from other purposes.
As a parent of a homeschool 10-year-old, I'm really excited. Can you say anything about working with homeschool groups or kids? I'm sure.
Well, interesting. I would say, homeschooling is where innovation's happening in education today, and it's very much a DIY, version of education. So it actually gives me a lot of hope. It's like amateur teachers trying to figure things out. They build their own networks of kids and parents rather than having the state select them into classrooms and locations. There's some really interesting, but traditional education doesn't want to study this too much and doesn't, and I'm not saying it's like some, big advocate of homeschooling. I just find that's where the juice is. We get a lot of parents coming to the Maker Faire, and they, I think, have this idea that because they're almost outside the classroom, they've got to go find this stuff out in the community, which is perfectly, aligns with at least how I'm thinking about this, that schools have limited resources and limited talents, and we've got to connect them out to the community more. I said if anybody's interested, I wrote sort of thought piece called a Smart Grid for Education, and the idea was almost analogous to alternative energy, that the future of education is like alternative learning. How could we connect to it? And in fact, students are hardwired to the power plants of their day, which is school. And so if you view the community as having lots of resources online and physically, how do you make those more visible? How do you make it easier to connect to that? How do you keep a record of participation in the fact that you might see to go there because your friend goes to take a welding class? All that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that some of the charter schools have kind of a technology, path and stuff like that. Can you guys talk a little bit about charter schools and how you feel about it?
Well, you've been there every week, so maybe.
I think charter schools have a lot more flexibility, and we've been working pretty closely with the charter school in Oakland this year. They have an electives class, a junior senior level electives class that's typically been targeted around robotics and bot ball competitions. But the teacher this year decided to use making as the curriculum base. And so it's a classroom of about 18 juniors and seniors, mostly minority, low income backgrounds. They've assembled themselves into 12 project teams, and again, the range of projects and the creativity being demonstrated there is just astounding. So that seems like a place where we can demonstrate some successes, develop some anecdotes that we can use with parents. Yeah, in the abstract, this stuff might sound scary, but here's a bunch of projects that kids have worked on.
So maybe it's a step up from homeschooling scenario.
Yeah. So I think that's another foot in the door.